All right, so this will be 3D Max 2025, right? This will be our first lecture on the introduction to this software. And I think I discussed this last class. No one here has ever used 3D Max, right? So it'll be from scratch. All right, good. But you guys know definitely other softwares, right? Maybe Revit, maybe AutoCAD, maybe Rhino, right? So I mean, they all kind of share very similar things, right? Viewports, right? Certain file, how you move around the space. But of course, each one has something a little bit different. So this is when you launch 3D Studio Max for the first time, this is what you're going to see here, right? And this screen is broken up into, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, I would say 5 different areas that you're gonna use eventually, right? You can definitely move things and dock things in different locations, but for now, let's leave everything as it is. I'm also going to discuss only the things that affect us as architects, right? Because 3D Studio Max is not only for architecture work, right? It can be used for other professions, right? Like what, for example? Yes. Who else do you think uses 3D Studio Max? Engineers, yes. Anyone else? Yes, okay. What else? Gamers, right? This, you can create games with this, right? You can model environments, right? You can do environmental analysis, right? With water movement and cloud movement and different things, right? You can make it also used for movies, right? Where you can make movie sets that are virtual, right? In 3D Max just because of the quality of it. So that means that the tools here are open to, lots of different professions, right? So it means as architects, we don't need to know everything about 3D Studio Max. The most that we need is maybe, I would say 5 to 10% of the entire software, right? That will make us, help us make the best looking renderings in the space, right? Everything else that it doesn't apply to us, I'm just going to ignore, right? Otherwise, this would take, a few years to cover everything. So I'll try to focus on the key elements here that'll help us build and move around the space in this area here. So let's start here with the viewports, right? If you see here, we have one big viewport here, right? And in 3D Max, there's typically 2 or 3 different ways to achieve the same thing, right? So if I want to make, this viewport, let's say right now is one viewport, right? You see down here on the bottom right, little tab here. If I click this, it'll maximize, or go back to the typical 4 viewports that we have here, which is top, front, left, and perspective. And all these can be changed to really whatever you want here. When I click on each viewport, what happens? Yes, well, not really. It would just make a little brown, you see here, or brown or yellowish line, right? You can tell that's the current viewport right here. We see some data here. We have 4 tabs, a plus sign, a top, a standard, and wireframe. These we'll discuss in a second. We have this over here, which is what? This you might recognize from AutoCAD, if you use AutoCAD. Any ideas? Yes, it's like an orbit, right? Where you can move around the space and orbit around, right? And why, I mean, you could definitely have different viewports here. You can have only 2, you can have only 3. I like working with 4. And what's the idea of working with so many viewports? Why do I want to have, different sides?
You can see different perspectives of how it's coming out.
Exactly, you can see a section view, right, along with a plan, and you can start to model things a little bit more precise. So in the viewports, again, they're all the same. If I want to really maximize it, you can either go here, right? Make it bigger or smaller, right? But let's talk about these 4 tabs. We have the plus sign, the top, standard, and wireframe. The first one has a plus sign. If I click here, lots of buttons, right? But we don't need most of these things. We again have maximize viewport, right? That we just did. And you're gonna see here also Alt plus W. So a lot of things here have keyboard shortcuts. So it does the same thing. If I press here Alt and W, it's the same thing there. So 3 different ways to achieve the same process. These 2 I would ignore. Don't use those because they limit where you can render. So main thing is the one here. Show grid. You see this grid here. When I render, I really don't use the grid. So I typically turn it off, right? Because what I do when I model is I typically model somewhere else, and I export my model to 3D Max, right? If I wanted to use the grid, what is typically the grid used for? To make Well, if you want to define, space, you can set up the grid to be whatever you want, right? You can say it's going to be a 1 foot grid, right? So you can quickly make massing models, right? And that's 3 by 4 or such things, without having to think too much about size. But the grid's not really used too much in, at least for our class, since we're doing our own rendering. So everything's already defined by a certain size. So we're not building things according to grid, right? So for the most time, I'm gonna keep my grids off. Then we have, this we don't need. We have here configure viewports. We can go here, and then we get a bunch of more details. So one thing about 3D Max is that it's a very good software, but it's fairly complex because everything has so many options, right? There's a drop-down menu, there's a subcategory, a second subcategory, and it's not like, let's see, do you guys know Lumion? Or have heard of Lumion, right? Or maybe Twinmotion, right? So those softwares tend to do everything for you, right? And the whole setup here is almost like a game, right? It has almost no buttons, right? This gives you the option to modify anything. So everything has a lot of subcategories. So if we go to layout here, again, we can choose all these layouts here for our viewport if you want to, but I'll leave it as 4 for now. We can also click here. If you see when I move my mouse here, the mouse changes to this view here, and I can afterwards just quickly move. And these things are pretty standard, I think with most softwares, right? I don't use Rhino, but I assume it's the same thing there. You guys tell me if I'm wrong. Yes? Okay. All right, so that's all we need for the first one. The second menu here, it's these two, for now, they're empty. You see here for cameras. Eventually, once we start setting up cameras, we're gonna see all the cameras there. We can put camera for the living room, exterior, garden. They'll start to show up here. Same thing with the lights. For now here, the main thing is we can choose what to see in each viewport, from perspective to bottom, front, back, left, and right. For now, these things we'll ignore, and some of these points I'll bring back at a later class when we have more information. Right now, they're kind of useless at this point in class. Third tab here that says standard, that only applies to the viewport. So whatever you see here, right? So right now, obviously, we have nothing in our viewport, but depending also on your computer, right, how quick it is, and the quality of your graphics cards, you might want to say that I want better quality viewports. That means that you're gonna see more detail, more materials, maybe more shadow in the preview, right, before renders, right? For now, it's set to standard, which is a nice kind of a quality mode. And of course, if your computer is slower, you can move it to performance, right? In case your graphic cards might not be as quick, right? So you can still move quicker in the space, right? For now, we haven't modeled anything, so we'll look at it later in more detail, what each one affects the space in your viewport. So for now, we can ignore the other points there. The fourth one here is how we visualize our model, right? What is wireframe? That's our default setting.
Just lines?
That's lines, right? So wireframe is a pretty easy way to see things, right? It's pretty fast because we're not having to render anything. The other ones we have, facets, bounding box, flat color, hidden lines. They're more of a three-dimensional where you see the actual face of each object, but of course in more detail or less detail. And for now, I think that's all we need for these 4 categories here, right? Same thing applies to here, here, and those things here. This one here, right, on the left side. That's going to be, let's call it our layers, right? So right now we can select here by shape, geometry, 2D shapes, by lights, by cameras, and we can specify what to view in our scene depending on these things. Right now we have no layers because nothing has been made, but eventually we'll set up some layers here so we can be really organized in our files, right? And as you guys know, layers for us are very important, right? Whether it's Photoshop, right, InDesign, AutoCAD, Rhino, they play a huge part in our work, right? Anyone here doesn't use layers? Yes. All right, so yeah, definitely, we'll talk about that in more detail afterwards. All right, so where should we go next? Up here, right? So up here is our typical tabs that we have. A lot of these tabs we're not going to use, but let's say here, the ones that we're gonna use the most are gonna be this one, which is move, rotate, and scale, right? In any software, those are the 3 main ones that we're going to always use. We can skip these, we can skip these, we can skip here. This is the snaps, right? What are snaps? Anyone? Yes. Cindy, right?
Yeah. Is it like when it's
Yes. So snaps are used for building something, right? And you can quickly snap to a midpoint, center of the line, the corner, something, right? But they work pretty well, yes. So that we set up afterwards. For now, we can ignore those. We can ignore here, right? And we have some rendering tools here. At this point, we haven't covered those elements, but we'll get back to it later. Down here, right, you see this category over here. We have this kind of line that I can move here, left and right. And right now it's set up from 0 to 100. And a few other tools over here, like play button, pause. What do you think that is? To what?
Like to record.
Yes, to record what? Animation, yes. So this is to record animations, right? So animations here are, they're very good, but they're very time consuming, right? And since they released Lumion, you know, I stopped doing these things here because you need a supercomputer, right? So imagine that a good rendering, right, that is detailed might take you what? 5 minutes, 10 minutes for one rendering, right? How do you make an animation? Let's say this an animation, let's see. So if you look at movies, right? 1 second of movie is typically how long? It's called FPS, frames per second. So 1 frame of 1 second of movie typically takes how many frames? Sorry, 1 second of movie time takes how many frames on average? 15, yeah, but the average time is 30. 30 is the average movie time. If you watch, you know, something on YouTube, right? So that means that it takes 30 renderings to create 1 frame or 1 second of video, right? So if one rendering takes 5 minutes, you know, and you need to make 30 for 1 second, right? It's gonna take quite a bit of time, right, to render. So although they could be very nice and precise, they're typically very time consuming, right? So it might take you a few days to create, I don't know, a 10-second video, right? Because a 10-second video requires how many renderings?
300?
300, right? Just to make, you know, a very simple video. You could definitely do it, you know, you can also outsource your work, right? Many companies outsource to China, outsource to India because they have warehouses of supercomputers where they have, you know, 50 computers rendering at the same time, right? So you can save time and money, and many times they're outsourced to other countries, the renderings. And because we now have Lumion, I think there's no point in covering those details here, you know, because that'll be covered in, you know, you guys can learn in that other software. But it's a tool that is still here used, right? Then we have this little area down here on the bottom right, a very small area here. But there we have our zoom, zoom all, zoom extents, zoom region, pan, orbit, and of course, extend to make it bigger or smaller. The final tab here is the one here. This is probably our most important tab for 3D Max. That's where we have all our tools to build and create. And again, we can ignore most of them, but if you go here to the plus sign, right? This defines the first categories down here. The first one is 3D primitives. Second one is 2D shapes, lights, and camera. We can ignore the last 3. The next one here, this is your properties. If you want to modify something, it's called modify here. Then we have hierarchy. If you want to define, if you want to change the, what's it called? Gumball. Gumball's in Rhino. But if you want to move the gumball to a different location, you can go here and you can put it wherever you want, right? In case you want to rotate things in a certain way. This one we're going to ignore. We're not doing motion in this class. And the last one here is display, where you can hide things and show things in the model. So those are kind of the 5-6 categories that we're going to be using through the class, right? As we learn different skills here. You might see this little one here. Right now it's something that is blank, but in case you see the 2 lines on top here, if you put your mouse here, let's see, I can drag it out, and I can put it, you know, somewhere. I can put it on top. I can put it on the bottom here. If I drag it there, then I can just close it here. If you happen to close, like if I go here, right, and I close this, let's say I move it here, it's gone. So this is the Scene Explorer. I can always go back here and put it back here. There it is. And if you go here to, let's see, scripting, Arnold, substance, rendering. Customize. They always change something in every software, but something small. There used to be a category here for all your tabs. So in case somehow things get shifted here, you want to go back to the default settings, right? You go to customize and you go here to load custom UI scheme, right? If you go here for a second, it's gonna go to this folder and you can go to default UI, that's user interface. And you do open and it will reset your 3D Max to what it used to be from scratch in case you move or close something by mistake. That's always good to know here. Okay, any questions? Okay, don't be afraid to jump in. Yeah? Can you guys see back there? Yeah? You guys are good? Okay. If you want, you can close those blinds if it helps you out with the, the darkness. All right, so although we're not really modeling here, right, we do need to know some basic modeling skills in 3D Max so we can get around to modifying elements later. So let's start by, I'm gonna make this thing bigger. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna make some basic shapes, right? So if you go to the plus sign, here we have the sphere and here we have box, sphere. So I'm gonna make a few shapes here. So how do you make a shape? You click, you drag your mouse, you let go, and then you move your mouse, oops, here, forward. So right now, okay, first task here. This thing is in wireframe. How do I move it to the, how do I change my view? Where do I go? Yes. Yes. Okay, so here, right, wireframe. And let's see what we have. So let's zoom in here, a bit here. So we have wireframe, we have a default shading, which is this, right? So default shading, again, is very basic. So we have mostly just black for shadows. There's no other gradients. If you go to facets, nothing really changes there. Bounding box, it's almost like wireframe. Flat color, is this useful, flat color? No, right? Why? What's the problem with this shape?
You really see the shape.
You can't see the shape, right? So you could do one more thing here. So if you do F3, F3 is wireframe, a shortcut, right? If you do F4, what does it do? So F4 adds some lines to define the shape, right? So I always use F3 and F4. I'm rendering, I'll do F3 quickly, F4, without having to hit many keys here. So that is, that shows the edges, which is nice. If you do hidden line, a little bit there. And then we have the ones that you never want to use, right? Clay is kind of pointless. And then of course we have stylize, right? Which means graphite, color pencil. If I do graphite here, you see that it took some time to get there, right? Yeah.
Rewind back a little bit.
Sure.
How did you get
To where?
how did you get that?
So if you see here, we're in this category. Let me go back to the beginning here. And we're on the fourth tab here, right, where it says edges or wireframe. And here you can pick the other options. And I went to stylize, the last one here. So I tried graphite. So graphite, I've never used this once, right? And the negative thing about these ones here, let's say color pencil here, or what else do we have? Acrylic, pastels, right? What do you think is a negative about this here? Any ideas? Yeah.
You saw like your computer like has more like
You're going in the right direction, yes.
You want to use more of the CPU or the CPU?
Yes, so if I'm working, let's say here, right? Computer's working nicely, right? Once I just say, okay, let me make it with the graphite. Now you're pushing your GPU, your graphic card, to work really hard because it's gonna have this background here. It's gonna kind of superimpose a layer of this. So this makes your computer work really hard for no reason, right? So it just kind of, it has a sense of, and also it'll make rendering slower because it's working hard in the background. So I really wouldn't use any of those details there. So I will keep it as, something very basic for now. I'll keep it as, let's see what's good here. Yeah, I guess we'll keep it as default shading. And with this, I typically like to have the F4 on because it refines a little bit more the edges of the shape here. So let me make a few shapes here. We did box, we can do, and we'll talk about. And for now, I'm making things uh, without any detail, right? I'm not checking how big they are. I'm just making shapes, right? So I'm going to sphere, making things here. I'm going to cylinder, doing things. Let's go tube, right? And let's go here torus. Okay. So now that we have these shapes here, you're gonna see that when I do F4, right? F4, you have a very nice defined shape. When I do F4, you can see more detail, right? And this detail is the underlying geometry, right? What makes up these shapes in the 3D Max here. And what do you notice about these shapes right here? Let's say maybe this one here. Is it a precise shape? Or no, right? So you can adjust the geometry to add more or less lines, right? Obviously, if I add more lines to the shape, this becomes more refined and looks more like a circle, right? If I take away lines, we start to see straight lines making up the circle. So from far away, looks great. Once you get very close, it's lacking detail. So eventually what you can do is you can modify the geometry of objects depending on how close they are or far away from the camera if you want to define those details right here. All right, so now that we have those things here, right, I think it's important to know how do we move around here, right? And when you move, what are the three things you always do? Orbit, pan, and one more. Zoom, right? Right, so orbit, let's start with the simple ones. Pan. Pan is just you press on the wheel of your mouse, right? These things might be different than Rhino. Zoom is what? Just the wheel, right? Simple. And orbit is the one that's a little bit tricky. So orbit is you press the wheel on your mouse and you hold down the Alt key to go like this. And there's three ways to orbit here, right? So whatever you find most comfortable. The first way, the one that I like to use, is hold down the Alt key, press the mouse, and just orbit like this. So this orbit works around the entire scene, right? When you orbit, you can also orbit around a certain element. So for example, if I first pick the sphere, select it, and then I orbit again, where am I orbiting? Yeah, if I pick here, that becomes my new center point to orbit the space, right? I can also go up here, right? And I can click here. And can orbit through that little wheel. Or I can go down here and let's call the orbit sub object. It gives you this little yellow circle, and you can do the same thing, right? Some of these are kind of helpful if your computer has a touchscreen, right? Or laptop. For a keyboard, I think the Alt and press the wheel is probably the easiest way to get around the space here. All right. You guys good? Yeah? All right, what else do you think we need here? So let's do move, right? So you guys know AutoCAD, you guys know Rhino. If I want to move in Rhino, what do I do?
Command move.
Huh?
Command move.
Yes, but here there's no commands, right? You can't type anything. Everything's done through clicking, right? You can't type move, you can't type anything. That only happens in AutoCAD and Rhino. So if I want to move this box here, I could select it, right? But I can't do anything right now. We have the, let's call it the gumbo here, but we need to activate the move command. So we go up here to the move tab. Now the gumbo now turns active, and I can now, select either certain axis, or I can pick the middle. That gives me freedom to go in any direction, right? Same thing with, let's say, rotate, right? If I click here, hit rotate, then I can now select those elements there. And same thing with scale. If I pick scale, I can make it bigger, or I can scale along a certain axis and I can deform the shape. But again, these are not very precise movements, right? I can't say move it 2 feet here. Yeah, we'll cover those in a second here. Also, there's one thing here that I forgot to do, right? When you open AutoCAD or Rhino for the first time, what do you always set up first? Huh?
The
Before that, Cindy? The units, yes, yes. And that's important because by default, when you go here, so if you go to customize, you go to unit setup. Right now it's set to nothing. It's not metric, it's not US, it's just decimals, right? So decimals, so if I click on this box, right, and I go here to the properties, which is this little box over here, it's gonna tell me the box's length, the width, and the height, right? And right now this box is 35.068 decimals, right? So although you can model this, the problem with having everything is decimals is what? Eventually it will affect application of lighting and materials, because this box might be either too big or too small, right? And if it's too small, you can't really apply materials properly when you go to scale them, right? It'll be kind of off and all messy. So I should have gone here, unit setup, and just change to US. This leave it as default, and then change the lighting units from international to American, and do OK. So now when I click on this box, it's 2 feet 11 inches by 5 feet by 8 feet 7, right? So we have now a certain size that we can modify, and I can actually, go here to each tab, modify it, or I can just, let's go here, make it 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. So make it a precise cube. And there's my box. So now that this box has been modified, I can select here, go to the properties. We can see everything about this box, right? We can see that the length, the width, the height, and we have also segments. We have length 1, 1, and 1. So any idea what segments are? No? So let me go here and make this into wireframe. What's the button for wireframe? F3, right? So yes. So you see there, right? This is my box, right? And when I start adding segments, watch what happens. 2 segments there, 2 segments there, and 2 segments here. When I do F3, it looks the same, right? Or if I do F4, nothing has changed, right? So why would I want to add more segments to a certain geometry, a certain shape? What's the benefit?
Maybe you want to just move one surface out of the whole surface.
Exactly, yes. So more segments means more points to modify, right? Whether you want to move a surface, whether you want to snap to this point, right? Or snap to this point, you have now all those extra points to snap to, right? And of course, you can really put here tons of points like this. And if I put the max here, which is, let's say 200, 200, 200 here, right? It makes no difference for the rendering, right? But it would definitely make a difference in when you save your file, right? Because now you made what? More geometry, right? Which means the file gets bigger, right? It's going to require more time to render. So keep that in mind to always kind of limit this to whatever you think you're going to use. If you're not going to plan to modify the box, then leave it as 1. So it becomes a very simple box like this. The other ones here, let's say this one here, right? It's again, a very simple shape. It's a cylinder. But around the edges here, it's very, rough. So if I click it here and I go back to, again, modify, we see that we have radius 1, radius 2, and the height. So radius 1 is the outer radius. Radius 2 is the inner one. The height, of course, is that. And then we have height segments, which is 5. So right now, we can add more segments there, but do I need to add more there? No, I can make it 1. Right? The ones that I want to add are the sides. Right now we have 18. So if I go here and modify this and add more sides, again, and then of course is here, look, here I can keep going for, I don't know, so the max is 3,600 sides, which is insane. So at one point, so at what point do you think we can stop here with sides? Maybe 50 is already good enough, right? And then the next topic is, what if you make less sides? Then you can make other shapes, right? So if I go to the least amount of sides, least I can do is 3, right? So we made now this shape, right? If we do the next set, square, what is that? Pentagon, right? Hexagon, and keep going until we get to something like this, right? Same thing with the sphere, right? This sphere definitely has more sides. It has 32 segments. We can put more segments to make it more precise sphere, or we can go down to the least and make something like this, right? So the least is 4, that, until we get something more precise. So sometimes they're used because you want to modify the object. Sometimes they're used because you want to get more clarity or more precise elements, right? More curvature in the elements that we have here. I know it's hot here, right? And a little dark, so there's a lot of yawning here. All right, anything else, you guys? All right, so we have that. All right, so moving, right? So this object here, right? So when I move this object here, but I want to move precisely, right? And right now I'm guessing. So when I click here, right? So when I click on the object, I'm clicking, and then we have here the move tab, the rotate tab, and the scale. So I'm activating different commands here. When I click this tab with my left mouse, I can move it free-handed. When I click it with the right mouse, I activate, you know, more precise controls here, where I can actually input data here, and I can say, you know, move this thing. So okay, so there's two of them here. The one here is the absolute world of this object, which means what? So it means where this object is located in relation to what? To the 0, 0, 0 axis, right? Which is what? The center of the space, right? So if I were to move this thing here and put 0, 0, and 0 here. So now this object is where? Is at the center of your, you know, world, because this thing really has no boundary. I could zoom out forever, right? And then get lost here. So the first one controls its relationship to the 0, 0. The next one here controls the movement. So let's say I want to move this box 3 feet along the x-axis. Then you can move it there precisely in any direction you want to go, X, Y, or Z, right? And now you see that this box also moved 3 feet from the X from point 0, 0, right? Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right, so we can be precise with the rotate also, right? When I rotate here and I click in this box, you see where the numbers there, right? I'm going to 26.8, 27.8. That's not very precise at all. But if you click this one here, right? Look at here, called the angle snap toggle, it will limit rotation to 5-degree increments. So it's always be 5, 10, 25, 30. So you can be more precise when you rotate with these elements here. You can also go here if you want to. Again, you can right click with your mouse and you can input, let's say, 45 degrees along the X, and, you know, define those details there also. Or then if you go back, you know, minus 45 to go back what it used to be. Same thing applies to scale, right? You can right click it and you can scale along certain axes. You can do an overall scale. If I want to make this box double the size, I can input 200% and start to modify those details there in the box. All right, let me just get rid of some of these things here. Okay. And let's start fresh. Let's make a box again, right? And we'll make this box, let's make it be 10 feet by 10 feet. All right, and let's do, what else do we have to do a lot here? So I'm trying to think of the commands that we use all the time. So copy, right? How do we copy in other softwares? We type in copy, right? So copy here, there's no such thing as a command, but we use the keyboard. So first of all, I have to select the object. Oops. So I'm gonna pick this key here, select it, right? I have to hold down the shift key and then move it. and then let go, right? So it's gonna give me 3 ways to copy, right? We have copy, we have instance, and we have reference. And we have how many copies do you want, right? So what do you think is the difference between copy, instance, and reference? Any ideas? Yes, Cindy.
Copy is like copying anywhere you want.
Okay.
Reference is precise.
Okay. No, but thank you for yeah. It's okay. Yeah, yeah. Any other ideas? It's all about space, and how much space do you take up in your when you save the file, right? So let's make a little kind of experiment here. I'm gonna copy this box, right? So I'm gonna copy it. I'm gonna make let's see here. I'm gonna copy it down here. I'm going to copy. I need 3 of them, so 2 more here. And I'm gonna do 1 row in a different copy. So the first row here, I'll do copy, and I want that says 7 more copies. The second row here, I'm gonna again do copy, but I'll do instance, again 7. The next one we'll copy again, but we'll do reference, and again 7. All right, so they're all identical from this point of view. So why is it crucial to understand which is the best copy option for you, right? The first one here, that is copy, right? So each one is an identical copy of itself, right? So that means if I go here and I modify this box, and I go to properties here, and I make this box, let's say, taller, what's happening? Other ones are not moving, right? So I can go to this box here and make it different, right? So, or make it less. So each one is a copy, identical copy, right, by itself, right? Which is so. And what is the negative part about that element, having that?
If you're making like a facade pattern and you want to block them because
Yes.
when you change something, you want to change.
That's one thing, yes, how it works. But what else? Think about space. Let's say that this block's actually a pretty nice looking chair, right? And this chair on your hard drive is 10 megabytes, right? You copy this chair this many times, what's gonna happen to your file? 10 megabytes, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Your file is now increased by 80 megabytes, right? So I've had students copy very precise trees, right, 1,000 times, and their file is 5 gigabytes. And then they're asking, why does the file take so much long to save, right? And that will, file will typically crash, get corrupted, right? The next one here is copy as instance, right? So if let's say I go here again and I modify the height, right? Or I go to this one here and I modify anything. What is an instance doing? I click the first one. So every file here is referenced to the original one, right? And vice versa. So that means that if this file is 10 megabytes, right? And I copied it 7 more times, how big is the file? 10, yeah. Nothing has changed, right? So I could copy 1,000 trees, it's still 10 megabytes, the file, right? Because every file is referenced to the original one here. The next one here is reference, right? So that means that if I click here and I try to make it bigger, what happens? I can't. It has to be the original one, right? So that's not, sometimes you lose track of where things are, so I like to always use instance, right, for everything. Whether it's for trees, chairs, things that are gonna be copied multiple times, and eventually when you're working with the environment, you're gonna be copying trees, right? Bushes, cars, chairs, tables, right? Things that are pretty, detailed, and you wanna try to keep the file down in size because, so although Max is a very good software, I guarantee you will crash, it will crash, always. It always crashes. So you lose files all the time, and it crashes when it gets too big, the files, right? Well, nevertheless, it still will crash, so prepare for that. Because I don't know why, since I think AutoCAD, in my case, has never crashed once, ever. In my whole time with AutoCAD, has never once crashed. But 3D Max will crash at least once a week when I use it. So we should discuss all about auto backup, right? Those things, yes.
Okay, so the instance, if you move a box, does
No, those things, no, that's still separate. But if I move the box here, and I go here and I move, they're still linked together in any space, yes. So again, it could be used for basic shapes, you know, facade studies like those, but it's mostly used for elements that have a lot of detail, right, in the model, yes. All right, so actually, let me jump in here before I forget, you know, to the auto backup. That's very important for you guys to have, because you don't want the computer to crash and you don't have it set up and you lost all the work. And you send me a crying email that it happens all the time. So if you go here to customize, right, and you go to preference, all the way at the bottom here, go to files and here. So auto backup is enabled, which is good. By default, it's making 10 backup files. We don't need that many. I think we can make 3 backup files. And how often do you want the computer to save? What's a good number?
10 minutes?
I use 5. Yeah, but again, that's in case, you know, something happens. The most I lost is 5 minutes of work, right? So I put 5, and the file will be called auto backup, which is fine. You can, if you want, give it a different name, and do OK. So now, where does the file go? If this computer crashes, where do I get my file? You have to go to your folder. Let's see here. We go to Documents. There it is, 3D Studio Max. And here's Auto Backup, Auto Back. And right now, we have our first backup file that was made at 9:31. Yeah, that was like 9 minutes ago. And eventually, you're going to have a second file and a third file. So in case your computer crashes, you go here. I take this file, I right-click it, do copy, right? You drop it into your personal folder, right? You change the name, and you relaunch it again, and you're good. You go back to working again, like nothing happened. So that's definitely good to know. Yes?
Each 2 minutes, does it save a new file or the same file but it updates the file?
It gets updated, yes. So you have 1, 2, and 3. When it gets to 5, it goes back to the first one and resaves it again every 5 minutes. So they're always the most current files that you have, yes. Okay, so the next thing that we need to know here is snaps, right? Let's say, you know, I want to start to, you know, move this box. I want to put it here, you know, this box here and put it here. For now, it looks pretty good, right? Until you go and rotate it, and they're in different spots. So the snaps, you know, like everything here is this one here. It's a 3 with a little magnet here. So I'm gonna click the snaps, and then I have to set them. So just again, right-click for advanced options. Right-click it, and then we have all the typical snaps, right? Grid points. In this case, I'm gonna set up midpoint, endpoint, and I think that's it for now. Just those 2 points, and then close this. So now when I snap here, you're gonna see that that's turned on, right? It's blue. First, I click in the box, it turns white. You see a little yellow box, it means it found a point. Now I can click and drag it out. And when I get close to the next point, let's say here, it turns green when it found something. So now it's snapped properly to that point. And we can quickly now take that and start to make those details like that. All right, does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. How long have we been recording? Before I forget. I don't know. I think we still have time, right? All right, so that's can be in between, you know, the snaps and the move, rotate, scale. You can do pretty much almost anything in 3D Max here, right? Other things we'll cover eventually in more detail. But the next thing I want to cover here is the use of those extra lines in the box. Let's say I make this box here, right? Again. And this box is, let's make it almost like a building size. So let's say the length here, let's make it roughly 20 feet. Let's make it 20 by 20. And the height is, let's say 50 feet. So again, it's rough numbers here. But roughly 20 by 20 by 50, right? If I do F3, right? This box is very simple, right? There's no extra lines. So what is something you guys always do in the beginning of any design project? before you start working, what do you start, looking at ideas? What do you build? Massing models? Do you guys ever do those things? No? Okay. Although it's ideal to build them by hand, I like to build them by hand. You can also do it here, but it's a more abstract way. So right now, let's say this shape it's very simple, right? So it means it only has these points here. But I'm gonna copy this shape here. I'm gonna select it, hold down the Shift key, copy it as a copy, identical copy here. And now to that one, I'm gonna select it, go to Properties here, and give it more segments. Let's say here, let's give it 4, 4, and 4. So now that's my new shape, right, like this. If I do F3, they're identical, right? Nothing happens. But now I want to take those points to my my advantage and be able to create something quickly, right? Something I can visualize. So right now, when I try to go here, what if I want to take this point and extract it or move it? I can't, right? Why?
Oh, because it has no point.
Yeah, so right now, it's not, what it has is parameters, right? So I mean, it has a length, so that defines those points. What I have to do is I have to break up those parameters. So in a way, I have to explode this shape, right? So although explode is a command, is over here, you select it, you right-click it, and you go down to convert to editable mesh. That's the same idea as explode in other. So we do convert to editable mesh. You see now we lost on the properties the length, width, and height, and all we have now is vertex. You guys see blue point over here, maybe? You can select that point over there. You can select that point. We have edge. I can select individual edges. We have, what's that called? Face, polygon, like this. And we have the element, which is the entire shape. So let's say now I can start to model, right? I'm gonna do right now points. I can take this point and I can pull it right like this.
Good question.
Yeah.
Can you hold Control and Shift and select the vertex or the line without breaking it into a mesh?
No. You mean for the before you explode it?
Mm-hmm.
No. In 3D Max, that's not a possible yes. You have to actually explode it before you can actually select the points. Yeah. So like here, so now I can technically, start to make a very simple shape like this. If I do F3, all right, so there's my simple masking, right, that I just made. But of course, I'm limited to those shapes, right? If I take my other one here, and I do the same thing here, I select it, right-click it, convert to editable mesh, I do F3. I can maybe start by doing the polygon, where I can, let's do F3, F4, right? And I can take this one out. I can select more than one. If I do control, I can select multiple objects. Go like this. And I can start to create a kind of nice abstract shape here and try to make it more complex. Okay. All right, so there's my shape, right? So more points means you can explode this into more elements in the shape, and you can start to make, different massing models that are much, quicker, right? And the next thing that we have here is that we can also use modifiers. So I'm just touching on different topics that we can eventually use, but the way that 3D Max works is that everything's done through modifiers. If you want to extrude something, you modify it. If you want to twist it, you apply a twist modifier to this. So for example, if I take this shape here now, and I copy it again, I'm gonna do Shift. Let me copy it a couple times. Copy, let's do 3 times in case. We can take this shape and further modify it. So let's say we take this one here, right? And I go here to the properties, right? And then on the properties, you're gonna see the modifier list. So these are all things that you can apply to this shape to modify something. So let's say we go down here and we look for twist here. We can go here and we can start to further add more detail to this shape like this. By twisting it, you can say twisting along the X, Y, or Z axis. You can go to the next one here and we can again go to properties. Let's say that we want to refine the shape, right? I don't want, so right now it's hard to define these lines here, make it more precise for better shadows. If you see here, it's not really precise, the shadows. So if I take this again and I go to modify and we apply mesh smooth, right? What happened here? And then, you know, under here, we can go here and add a second iteration, a third one. And then after that, there's really no point because at that point it won't make a difference. And if we take this one here, right, and we go again to properties, modifier list, and I'm gonna do just, so this one is mesh smooth, and this one will be simply just, where is it? Smooth. That's going to define the geometry. You see every line here is defined. So now our shape has gone to a progression of different elements. If I turn off F4, see that's a very precise looking organic shape, right? That's a precise looking kind of structural element, right? And we can even do more. We can take this shape, right, and copy it again. Do copy. And now I'm gonna add a modifier that extracts geometry. So if I go here and I apply one that is called lattice. So lattice is going to extract, let's say, the structure, right? And then I can say here radius of the elements here, and I made almost like an exoskeleton of that shape. So again, this is not really for making a building, but for more for abstract massing models that can be used, you know, in your class. So this could be one stage more in the rendering process before you get to the actual final rendering to showcase different ideas. And once you get to this point here, you know, if you go very close here, you can see that we have the radius here, right? We have the segments, so we can add more segments to the radius. Doesn't really make a difference if I do F3. It's adding more here, but we don't need that. If we do sides, then more sides mean we can make it into a cylindrical shape like this, or we make it into a square shape like this. And we have this kind of nice simple exoskeleton. Then we have the points that are here, this stuff here. If you go to the joints here, we have tetra, octa, and icosa. So if we make it bigger, that's what happened between each piece here. So we can do tetra. We can add more segments to make it into a sphere. We can make it less segments. We can take it away to make it smaller. We can try other, you know, configurations like this. And we kind of made this structure like this, right? And we could technically take this, right, and recombine it with this to create, if I make this the, if I click it here, right, on top we have the name, right, box 006, and we have the color. So I can quickly click here, so make it red, put it back together here somewhat. And you have a very quick, you know, massing model to show the professor, right? Or show some ideas happening in your structure, right? Does that make sense for you guys? Are they useful for maybe design classes? Yeah? Okay. 9:52. All right, I think that's, I lost track when I started lecturing. But I don't think we've hit hour and a half yet, have we? No? And this computer won't show me. But I think this is the main part for today. So pretty much for you guys, right? I'll post the video today, right? When I go to my office. I want you guys to get up to this point. And for now, you guys are just experimenting, right? I want you guys to get familiar with 3D Max. So that means that go here to the plus sign and just, you know, create every shape you can, right? Go to the cone, right? Go to the teapot that's here. Teapot is a basic shape. We'll discuss it later why there's a teapot in 3D Max. You know, and then each shape, make it, then go to the properties of each shape and see what everything does, you know, the parameters here. You know, try F3, try F4, right? Try to copy using copy, instance, reference and see how they work. Experiment with the snaps, right? experiment moving things around, right, in a precise way. Yes.
How did you make that teapot?
It's just one of the basic elements here. So if you go to the plus sign here and under your under the sphere here, the teapot is just there. The teapot has been there since Max was released, right? Yeah, it's a shape that is there because it's used later on for testing materials, right? Like it's a nice soft shape, it's curvy. So eventually, when you're testing out glass, let's say metallic elements, things that are glossy, it's a great shape to just throw there, hit the material, and do a quick rendering. So it's a. So again, and you see it here. If you go to the sphere, there's also more things here, right? Again, we're not going to use everything, but if you go to extended primitives, there's other more complex shapes that are there. Let's say like the Hedra, or maybe a torus nut. Again, a great shape to use once you're testing for materials, and see how everything affects. So get familiar with this section. Get familiar with the property section, the modifier here, and then try to make something like this. Make a shape, make one that's more complex, and then play with different modifier lists to get familiar with these parts in the class, right? Then in the next class, we're going to start learning about rendering, sun, and shadows. So it means from next class we can start to render, right? And then I'll request the first renderings to start to document your process into the class, right? Yes.
Real quick, when you added the left segments, how did you move the points again?
Oh yeah, so let's say here. So let's do it here. So let's say this shape, right? First I did right click, convert to editable mesh, right? So once you did convert to editable mesh, then if you go to properties, then you have access now to those 5 categories, which could be segments or points. And now I can move those points individually wherever I want to here. Or you can also move, the whole face. If I pick that face, I can also move it like this. Just be careful that if you move things, you see here that this is looking black. That means that it moved too far in one direction. So if things start to intersect, then the geometry starts to get deformed. So be careful that you don't move things too much, because at one point, there is fine, but let's see here. Here, it starts to intersect with the other geometry, and then doesn't really work. So keep that in mind here.
Quick question.
Yes.
So for the snap, is there any way to like align, like if you move the rectangles, like the boxes,
Yes.
is there any way to align them back without like have them snapping together and just move them?
Again, align how?
Like
Yes.
if you move the box just further down,
Yes.
is there any way to align it back on the same line with the boxes?
Let's see here. I put a few boxes here. Okay, here's the box, right? I'm going to just copy it. Hold on, shift. Here. Copy. So let's say this box is here.
Yes. Can you align it back together with?
You will have to kind of snap it here back to the select it, click it here, then turn off the snaps, and then move it again to that point. Yes. Yeah.
So there's no way just having it in one place, but
No.
pushing it
Yes.
back
Yeah.
with aligning.
Yeah. They have that in Rhino or
Yeah, and Revit as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. These things, because again, this software, 3D Max, it's not made to let's say to make a plan, right? Revit, you can make a plan. AutoCAD, you can. Rhino, you can. This software is used for visualizing space. So most of the tools are just for 3D rendering and those things. So they're not tools that are as precise enough to make a plan or a section. You would typically you will export a plan into here, and then from here start building up from there. Right? So it's not as precise as say as AutoCAD or Rhino in that sense. Right? But again, a good question. Yes. Any other questions? No?
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
Let's say if I were to make a model in 3D Max, would I be able to like 3D print it?
You should be able to, because you can always export the files from here into different. I'm not sure. I don't do 3D printing, so I'm not sure what is the file format. Do you guys know?
It has to be a mesh, closed mesh.
So I mean, I know we've done it before because and again, if I click here, it said this file here, and I do file export selected. It's gonna give me all the file types here, and
I don't don't think it's here.
AutoCAD, Flight, Physical,
No.
3ds.
I don't think it's here.
I know it's possible, but I'm not sure which file needs to be used.
Start with the S, I think.
What about Collada? I feel like that's been used before. You can, yes. I'm just not sure which file tab you have to export it as. Yes, to make it work. Yes. Yes.
Can you turn this into a Rhino?
Yes, well, you have to export it into a file that Rhino would recognize. Yes.
FBX?
Yes. So if you do export, so again, export selected, typically FBX is the default file always, right? So it'll say Autodesk FBX, and that you can open in pretty much Lumion, Rhino, AutoCAD, any other software. Yes. Anything else? All right, guys. So let's take like a 10-15 minute break, right? Then we'll come back to class, right? And you guys can hopefully start trying some of these things in class, and I'll walk around and see what you guys. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you add like a picture like in the plan to like, let's say we draw a sketch?
Yes.
I just want to put it here to like have it.
Yes.
reference.
So eventually, you know, if I make, let's say, like a plane here, right? I can apply to this plane a map of something, whatever, a picture, and then in a way, then you can trace this. Yes, yes. Once we cover materials in class, again, ask me that again, and we'll try it out in class. Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions? All right, but for the video, so I can stop the recording the video. All right, so let me stop recording here, and I'll see you 1 second. Yes. Let me a second.